In the heart of Enugu State, where red earth meets endless sky, there existed a village called Umuala, a place where tradition held firmer than iron, and beauty was measured not by the lightness of one's step, but by the fullness of one's form. Here, the women moved like queens, their bodies celebrated as symbols of wealth, fertility, and divine favor. To be large was to be blessed. To be full-bodied was to be desired. But what happens when you are born into a world that has already decided you don't belong? What happens when your very existence contradicts everything your people hold sacred? This is the story of Adana, a girl born different in a place that worshipped sameness, a girl who would nearly destroy herself trying to fit in, only to discover that her difference was never a curse but a calling. By the end of this journey, you'll understand why the very thing that made her an outcast became the key to her destiny, and why sometimes the gods give us burdens not to break us, but to prepare us for greatness. The morning Adana entered the world, the midwives exchanged worried glances. Mama Obi, who had delivered 3 generations of Umuala children, wrapped the newborn slowly, her weathered hands hesitant. The baby was healthy, lungs strong, eyes bright, but she was small, delicate, fine-boned in a way that seemed almost fragile compared to the robust infants she usually welcomed into the world. She will grow, Mama Obi assured Adana's mother Nkechi, but her voice carried doubt like a pot carries water. Carefully, knowing it might spill, Nkechi held her daughter close, already feeling the weight of what this difference might mean. In Umuala, a slim girl was like a river without fish. People wondered what was wrong, what had been withheld. As Adana grew from infant to child, the whispers grew louder. Other mothers would purse their lips when she passed, their daughters, round and glowing, giggling behind cupped hands. Ogwu, they called her. Stick. Nwata nkena agafe nanyanri, they said, the child who food passes by. By the time Adana turned 12, she had learned to make herself smaller in ways that had nothing to do with her body, shrinking into corners, avoiding the village square during festivals, her eyes always downcast as if apologizing for taking up space in a world that had already decided she didn't deserve it. Childhood in Umuala was supposed to be a time of joy, running through cassava farms, swimming in the stream during dry season, learning to pound yam under the patient guidance of aunties who sang while they worked. For Adana, it became a daily lesson in inadequacy. While other girls her age began to develop the curves that would make them marriageable, she remained thin, her collarbones visible, her arms without the fullness that signaled health and beauty. At the village primary school, the other children were cruel with the casual brutality that only children possess. "Adana the skeleton," they would chant during break time. "If you stand sideways, you disappear." Even the teachers seemed to pity her, offering her extra portions of the midday meal with sad eyes that made her want to scream. "Why can't they just see me?" she thought desperately during those long afternoons. "Why does my body have to be the only thing that matters?" Her parents tried everything. Her father, Ikenna, a respected palm wine tapper, consulted the village herbalist, who prescribed bitter leaves and roots that Adana choked down every morning. Her mother cooked special meals, heavy stews thick with stockfish and crayfish, pounded yam served in portions that could feed 2 grown men, bowls of ukazi soup so rich with oil it glistened. "Eat, Nwam," Nkechi would plead. "You must eat to grow strong." And Adana ate, forcing down food until her stomach ached, until she felt sick with the effort of becoming something she wasn't. But her body refused to cooperate. She remained slim, her frame like a young palm tree, graceful but unbending. The other mothers would click their tongues when they saw her. "Nkechi, what are you feeding this child?" "Palm oil, cocoyam, she needs to eat." As if Adana's mother hadn't tried everything. As if love and worry could be cooked into soup and fed with a spoon. The worst moments came during the preparation for the new Yam Festival, when all the village girls would be presented in their finest wrappers, their bodies oiled until they gleamed like polished ebony. The girls would line up, giggling and preening, while the elders walked past, nodding approvingly at the full-figured ones, barely glancing at Adana. "That one is ready for marriage," they'd say of Ifeoma, whose hips had widened beautifully. "That one will bear many children," they'd declare about Ngozi, whose breasts were full and proud. When they reached Adana, the silence was louder than any insult. 1 year, Chief Okafor paused before her and shook his head slowly. "This one needs more time," he said, as if she were a crop not yet ready for harvest. The shame burned through her like fever. "I am trying." She wanted to scream. "Can't you see I'm trying?" At night, alone in the small room she shared with her younger sister, Chimaka, Adana would cry silently into her wrapper. Chimaka, blessed with their mother's full figure even at 9 years old, would sleep peacefully while Adana lay awake, her mind circling the same painful questions. What was wrong with her? Had she offended the gods somehow? Was she being punished for something she couldn't remember, some transgression from a past life? The questions multiplied like ants on spilled honey, endless and consuming. During the day, she learned to smile, to pretend the mockery didn't cut deep, to act as if she didn't hear the whispers that followed her like shadows. But inside, something was breaking. The constant rejection was building a wall around her heart, brick by bitter brick. And behind that wall, a desperate hunger was growing. Not for food, but for acceptance, for belonging, for proof that she mattered in a world that had decided she didn't. But how far would she go to find it? And what would she be willing to sacrifice to become the girl everyone wanted her to be? By the time Adana turned 15, desperation had replaced hope. The other girls her age were already being courted. Young men from neighboring villages would send emissaries to their fathers, bearing cola nuts and palm wine, speaking of bride price and future grandchildren. But no one came for Adana. The silence around her future was deafening, a void that seemed to grow wider with each passing moon. She watched Ifeoma get engaged to a wealthy trader's son, watched Ngozi receive beautiful wrappers from a farmer who owned 3 plots of land, and felt the acid of envy burn in her chest. When will it be my turn? She wondered. Will it ever be my turn? The answer seemed written in every pitying glance, every whispered conversation that stopped when she entered a room. She was being erased, made invisible by a body that refused to conform. It was Mama Ego, the widow who lived at the edge of the village, who first mentioned the potions. Mama Ego was known for 2 things: her massive size, which made her the envy of younger women, and her knowledge of medicines that could help girls who needed to develop. "Come to my compound tomorrow evening," she whispered to Adana one market day, her voice low and conspiratorial. "I have something that can change your life." Adana's heart raced. For the first time in years, she felt a spark of something that might have been hope. That evening, she could barely sleep, her mind spinning with possibilities. What if the potion worked? What if she could finally become the girl everyone wanted? What if she could finally belong? The questions danced through her consciousness like fireflies in the darkness, beautiful and elusive, promising light where there had been only shadow. The next evening, Adana slipped away while her mother was preparing dinner, claiming she needed to fetch water from the stream. Instead, she made her way to Mama Ego's compound, where the older woman waited with a clay pot filled with thick, dark liquid that smelled of bitter roots and something metallic that made Adana's stomach turn. "Drink this every morning and every night," Mama Ego instructed, her eyes gleaming with something Adana couldn't quite identify. Was it concern or greed? "Within 3 months, your body will change. You will fill out in all the right places. Men will notice you. Your mother will thank the gods." The price was steep, 5,000 naira, money Adana had been saving from helping at the market. But she paid it without hesitation. As she walked home clutching the pot wrapped in old newspapers, Adana felt a mixture of excitement and fear. The liquid inside seemed to pulse with possibility, with the promise of transformation. "This is it," she told herself. "This is how I become someone who matters." For 2 weeks, Adana drank the potion religiously, choking down the bitter liquid morning and night, hiding it behind the house where no one could see. At first, nothing happened. Then, on the 16th day, she woke up dizzy. By evening, she was vomiting violently, her body rejecting the poison she'd been feeding it. Her skin developed a strange rash, angry red welts that spread across her arms and chest. Her mother found her collapsed in their compound, the clay pot shattered beside her, dark liquid seeping into the red earth like blood. "Adana, Inwa Num, what have you done?" Nkichi's scream brought neighbors running. brought her father stumbling from the palm wine grove, brought chaos and fear, and finally, mercifully, brought someone with sense enough to send for the one person who might be able to save her. Mama Chidinma, the village healer, the woman everyone simply called Mama Chin. As Adana drifted in and out of consciousness, her body burning with fever, she heard Mama Chin's voice cutting through the panic like a machete through bush. "Bring her to my house, now, and someone find out what she took." In her delirium, Adana wondered if this was how her story would end. Not with acceptance, but with a desperate mistake that would become a cautionary tale mothers told their daughters. Had she really been willing to die just to be beautiful by someone else's standards? Mama Chidinma's compound was unlike anywhere else in Umuala. Where other homes smelled of cooking fire and palm oil, hers carried the sharp scent of herbs and healing roots. The walls were lined with clay pots and woven baskets, each containing remedies passed down through generations of healers. Adana was laid on a mat in the corner room, her body trembling, her skin slick with sweat. For 3 days, she burned with fever while Mama Chin worked tirelessly, preparing antidotes, bathing her with cool water infused with bitter leaves, forcing herbal teas past her cracked lips. Nkechi stayed by her daughter's side, her face etched with guilt and grief. "I should have seen," she kept whispering. "I should have known how much pain she was in." Ikenna stood in the doorway, his proud shoulders slumped, unable to look at his daughter without seeing his own failure reflected back. The failure to protect her from a world that measured worth in inches and pounds. On the 4th day, Adana's fever broke. She woke to find Mama Chin sitting beside her, grinding herbs with a mortar and pestle, the rhythmic sound somehow comforting. The old healer's face was weathered like dried leather, but her eyes were sharp and kind. "Welcome back," Mama Chin said softly, setting aside her work. "You gave us quite a scare, child." Adana tried to speak, but her throat was raw. Mama Chin lifted a cup to her lips, warm water with honey and lemon, and waited while she drank. When Adana finally found her voice, it came out as a whisper. "I just wanted to be beautiful. I just wanted to belong." The words hung in the air between them, simple and devastating. Mama Chin was silent for a long moment, her hands stilling on the mortar. Then she spoke, her voice carrying the weight of wisdom earned through years of watching people destroy themselves, trying to be something they weren't. "Let me tell you something, Adana," Mama Chin began, leaning forward so their eyes met. "I was once like you, born different in a village that prized sameness. But I was too large where others were normal-sized, my hands too big, my voice too deep. The children called me Mama Gorilla before I earned the right to be called Mama anything." She laughed, a sound both bitter and free. "I spent years hating my body, trying to shrink myself, starving myself, binding my chest. Until one day, I met an old healer from Nasuka who told me something that changed my life. The gods don't make mistakes. Every body is a message. Your job is to read it, not to burn it because you don't like what it says." Adana felt tears sliding down her cheeks, hot and cleansing. "But what is my body saying? That I'm not good enough? That I'll never be chosen?" Mama Chin reached out and placed her large, capable hand over Adana's thin one. "Your body is saying that you were not made for this village's narrow definition of beauty. You were made for something bigger, something beyond these red clay walls. The potion didn't fail you, child. This village's imagination failed you." Over the next week, as Adana recovered, Mama Chin taught her about the body, not as an object to be judged, but as a home to be honored. She explained how different regions had different standards, how what was beautiful in Umuala might be ordinary in Lagos, might be prized in Paris, might be overlooked in Tokyo. "Beauty," Mama Chin said while teaching Adana to prepare herbs, "is not a universal truth, it's a local agreement. And you, my dear, were never meant to live by local agreements." She showed Adana old magazines, yellowed pages from National Geographic and Time, where women of all shapes and sizes smiled from glossy pages. Some were thin like Adana, their collarbones visible, their limbs long and graceful. "See?" Mama Chin pointed. "In the world beyond Umuala, your body is not a problem to be solved. It's a canvas, waiting for the right eyes to see it." For the first time in her life, Adana began to imagine a future where her difference wasn't a burden, but a gift. It was a fragile hope, like a seedling pushing through hard ground. But it was there, growing slowly in the fertile soil of Mama Chin's wisdom. But could a seed planted in Umwala ever grow strong enough to survive in a world that was waiting to crush anything different? Recovery was slow, both physical and emotional. When Adana finally returned home, her parents watched her with new eyes filled with fear and love in equal measure. Ikenna, who had always been a man of few words, pulled her aside one evening as the sun set over the palm trees, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. "Adana," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I have failed you as a father. I let you believe that your worth was measured by other people's standards. I am sorry." It was the first time she'd ever heard him apologize for anything, and the weight of it broke something open inside her chest. She fell into his arms, sobbing, not from pain this time, but from release, from the relief of being truly seen by someone who mattered. Her mother held her that night, the two of them wrapped in a shared wrapper on the mat, Nkechi stroking her daughter's hair and whispering prayers of thanksgiving to Chineke and the ancestors who had spared her child's life. But Umuala hadn't changed just because Adana had nearly died. If anything, her attempt to alter herself became new fodder for gossip. The story spread through the village like Harmattan wind, how Chief Ikenna's daughter had nearly killed herself trying to gain weight, how Mama Ego's potion had almost claimed another victim, though Mama Ego herself denied any wrongdoing, claiming Adana must have mixed the medicine incorrectly. Some villagers expressed sympathy, but others saw it as confirmation of what they'd always suspected. Something was fundamentally wrong with Adana. She tried to fight against her chi, old Mama Ngozi declared at the market. You cannot fight your personal god. You must accept what you are given. The irony wasn't lost on Adana. They criticized her for trying to change, but they'd spent years criticizing her for not changing. There was no winning, no path to acceptance that didn't require her to be fundamentally different from who she was. The realization was both liberating and terrifying. Mama Chin had told her to give it time, to let her body heal, to rebuild her strength before making any decisions about her future. But time in Umwala moved like honey. Slow, sticky, trapping her in patterns that felt impossible to break. She watched Chiamaka, her younger sister, begin to attract the attention of young men, saw the pride in her parents' eyes when neighbors commented on how well Chiamaka was developing. The comparisons were never stated directly, but they hung in the air like smoke. This is what a daughter should be. This is what brings honor to a family. Adana tried not to feel bitter, tried to remember Mama Chin's words about local agreements and narrow definitions, but some days the effort of not hating herself was exhausting. On those days, she would slip away to Mama Chin's compound, where the old healer would put her to work grinding herbs or organizing medicine pots. Tasks that made her feel useful, purposeful, valued for something beyond her appearance. The annual harvest festival was approaching, the same celebration where, just a year ago, Adana had been passed over by the elders, where her inadequacy had been displayed for all to see. This year, Nkechi suggested she skip it. You don't have to subject yourself to that again, her mother said gently. Stay home. Help me prepare the food for the guests we'll host. It was meant as kindness, as protection, but Adana heard it as confirmation. You don't belong there, so don't even try. The old Adana would have accepted this gracefully, would have hidden in the shadows and pretended not to care. But something had shifted during those feverish days in Mama Chin's care, during those long conversations about bodies and worth and the gods' mysterious plans. No, Adana heard herself say, surprising even herself with the firmness in her voice. I'll go. I have as much right to celebrate the harvest as anyone else. Her mother's eyes widened. Whether in fear or pride, Adana couldn't tell. But Nkechi nodded slowly. Then go with your head held high and go and show them you are still here. But would showing up be enough? Or was Adana about to subject herself to another public humiliation that would break what little confidence she'd managed to rebuild? The harvest festival transformed Umuala into a riot of color and sound. Palm fronds decorated every compound gate. New yams were piled high in the village square, and the air thrummed with the beat of equi-drums. Women dressed in their finest Ankara wrappers, their skin gleaming with shea butter, their heads wrapped in elaborate jeel. The men wore crisp shirts and traditional chieftain hats, their faces bright with palm wine and pride. Children ran between the adults, shrieking with laughter, their hands sticky with chin-chin and ground nuts. It was beautiful and joyful and everything that made Umuala worth calling home. Adana arrived with her family, wearing a simple blue wrapper her mother had sewn, her hair braided in a modest pattern. She'd promised herself she would stay for an hour, show her face, then slip away quietly. But sometimes, destiny has other plans. The dancing began in earnest as the sun reached its peak. The girls and young women formed a circle in the center of the square, their bodies moving in time with the drums, their hips swaying in the hypnotic rhythm that had been passed down through generations. Watching them, Adana felt the familiar pang of longing and exclusion. They were so confident, so secure in their bodies, so certain of their beauty. Ifeoma led the dance, her movements fluid and sensual, drawing appreciative shouts from the watching crowd. Then, unexpectedly, Ngozi turned and beckoned to Adana. "Come, join us." For a moment, Adana froze, certain it was a trick, a setup for another humiliation. But Ngozi's smile seemed genuine, and maybe it was the memory of Mama Chin's words, or maybe it was simple defiance, but Adana found herself stepping into the circle, her body moving tentatively at first, then with growing confidence as the drums pulled her in. She danced differently from the others, her movements more angular, her style less about curves and sensuality and more about grace and precision. Where they swayed, she spun. Where they undulated, she leaped. She poured everything into it, all her pain, all her defiance, all her desperate hope that she could be beautiful in her own way. For 3 glorious minutes, she forgot to be self-conscious, forgot about the eyes watching her, forgot everything except the drums and the dust and the freedom of movement. When the song ended, there was a moment of silence. Then someone laughed, a harsh mocking sound that cut through her euphoria like a blade. "Look at how she moves, like a chicken with broken wings." Other voices joined in, the laughter spreading like fire through dry grass. "She thinks she can dance like us." Ogwu trying to be beautiful. The words crashed over her like a wave, drowning the brief moment of joy she'd felt. Around her, the circle of girls had stopped, some looking embarrassed, some laughing along with the crowd. Adana stood frozen in the center, exposed and humiliated, her breath coming in short gasps. Then she did something she'd never done before. She ran. Not the careful, measured retreat she'd perfected over years of managing shame, but a full sprint, pushing through the crowd, ignoring her mother's cry of, "Adana!" ignoring Chiamaka's startled face, ignoring everything except the desperate need to escape. She ran past the village square, past the palm wine grove, past the stream where children played, not stopping until she reached the outskirts of Umuala, where the bush began, where the red earth gave way to wild grass and thorny shrubs. She collapsed under an old iroko tree, gasping for breath, tears streaming down her face. "I hate them," she thought with fierce intensity. "I hate this place. I hate what they've made me believe about myself." The anger felt good, cleansing, like a storm washing away accumulated dust. She sat there as the sun began its descent, her body shaking with sobs that came from somewhere deep and primal. Behind her, she heard footsteps, careful, slow, deliberate, and turned to find Mama Chin approaching, her face solemn but not surprised, as if she'd been expecting this moment, as if this breaking had been inevitable all along. "The gods have their plans for you, Adana," the old healer said softly, settling beside her beneath the ancient tree. "But sometimes before we can rise, we must first fall completely." Was this rock bottom, or was there still further to descend? If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. That way you won't miss the next one. And if you'd like to support the channel, you can even buy me a coffee on Ko-fi. Every little bit helps keep these stories alive. Now, let's get back to it. Mama Chin didn't offer platitudes or empty comfort. She simply sat with Adana as the evening deepened around them, the sky turning from blue to purple to the deep indigo that meant night was coming. When Adana's sobs finally subsided into occasional hiccups, Mama Chin spoke. "I knew a man once, from the city. His name was Amika, and he traveled from village to village, looking for something specific. Not farmers, not traders, not palm wine tappers. He was looking for people who were different, who didn't fit the mold their villages had cast for them. Adana wiped her face with the edge of her wrapper, listening despite herself. What did he want with them? Mama Chin smiled mysteriously. He helped them find places where their difference was valued instead of scorned. He showed them that the world was bigger than their village's narrow vision. He changed lives. Does he still come to these villages? Adana asked, a desperate hope rising in her chest. Mama Chin shrugged. I don't know. That was many years ago. But men like him still exist. People who look beyond the surface, who see potential where others see problems. The question is, would you be brave enough to go with such a person if they came? Would you be willing to leave everything you know, even if everything you know has hurt you? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Leave Umuala. Leave her family, her parents who loved her despite everything. Her sister Chimaka, the red earth and palm trees that were as much a part of her as her own bones. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. I don't know, Adana admitted quietly. I'm not sure I'm brave enough for that. Mama Chin stood, brushing dust from her wrapper. Bravery isn't about being unafraid, child. It's about being terrified and moving forward anyway. Come, let's get you home before your mother sends the entire village searching. The walk back to Adana's compound was silent, but it wasn't the uncomfortable silence of shame. It was the thoughtful silence of possibility. When they arrived, Nkechi rushed out, relief flooding her face. Thank Chineke, I was so worried. She embraced her daughter fiercely, then stepped back, studying her face. Whatever she saw there made her pause. What happened out there? She asked carefully. Adana glanced at Mama Chin, who nodded slightly, then looked at her mother. I think I'm starting to understand something, Mama. I don't belong here. And that's not because something is wrong with me. It's because I was meant for something different. Nkechi's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. I've always known you were special, and I am. Different from the day you were born. I just didn't know how to protect you from a world that fears difference. It was perhaps the most honest conversation they'd ever had, standing in the compound under the emerging stars. Three women acknowledging a truth that had always been there but never spoken aloud. The next week passed in a strange limbo. Adana went through the motions of daily life, helping her mother with cooking, fetching water, working in the cassava farm, but her mind was elsewhere, wandering to Mama Chin's words about men from the city, about people who saw value in difference. She found herself staring down the road that led out of Umuala, wondering what lay beyond the horizon, wondering if she had the courage to find out. Then, on a humid afternoon when the air was thick enough to drink, something extraordinary happened. A sleek black car pulled into Umuala, unusual enough that children ran alongside it, shouting with excitement. Cars rarely came to the village. Most people traveled by motorcycle or on foot. The car stopped in the village square, and out stepped a man in a crisp white shirt and dark trousers, his shoes so polished they reflected the sun. He carried himself with the confidence of someone who belonged everywhere and nowhere, comfortable in his own skin in a way that made heads turn. His name, they would learn, was Obinna, and he had come to Umuala looking for something very specific, but was Adana ready to be found? Obinna's presence in Umuala created immediate buzz. He was a talent scout, that much became clear quickly, but not for the usual things. He wasn't looking for farmers to relocate to cities or traders to recruit for markets. He worked for a modeling agency in Lagos, one of the new ones that had begun to challenge traditional notions of Nigerian beauty. I'm looking for fresh faces, he explained to the crowd that gathered around him in the village square. People with unique looks, distinctive features, something that makes them stand out. We're building a new campaign, and we need real people, authentic beauty, not just the same faces everyone has seen before. The village women pushed their daughters forward, Ifeoma with her generous curves, Ngozi with her flawless dark skin, Chimaka with her full figure and perfect teeth. Obinna looked at each of them with professional courtesy, taking notes, asking questions. But Adana could see something in his eyes. Polite interest, but not the spark he was searching for. She hadn't intended to be part of the spectacle. She'd been helping her mother prepare dinner when Chimaka had run home breathlessly with news of the stranger from Lagos. Curiosity had drawn her to the square, but she stayed at the edges, half hidden behind Mama Obi's compound wall, watching the parade of beautiful girls present themselves to this man who held dreams in his hands like ripe oranges. Then, in one of those moments that changes everything, Obina's gaze swept past the crowd and landed on her. He went still, his practiced smile fading into something more genuine. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. "You," he said, pointing directly at her. "Come here, please." Every head in the square turned to follow his gesture. Adana felt her heart drop into her stomach. Not again, she thought. Not another humiliation. But Mama Chin's voice echoed in her mind. Bravery is being terrified and moving forward anyway. So she moved forward, her legs shaking, her hands clenched at her sides, feeling every eye on her thin frame, waiting for the laughter to begin. Obina studied her with an intensity that made her want to disappear. He walked around her slowly, professionally, the way her father examined palm trees before tapping them. "What's your name?" he asked. "Adana," she whispered. "Louder, please." "Adana," he nodded. "Adana, do you know you have one of the most interesting faces I've seen in years? Those cheekbones, that long neck, the way you hold yourself, graceful like a dancer or a diplomat." There was a collective gasp from the watching crowd. Interesting. Graceful. Were they talking about the same Adana, Ogwu, the stick girl? Obina pulled out a card. "I'd like you to come to Lagos. We're casting for a campaign that celebrates diverse beauty, and you have exactly the look we're searching for. Different, elegant, memorable." Adana stared at the card. Thick, expensive paper with embossed lettering. Obina Okafor, Talent Director, New Face Modeling Agency, Lagos. The words seemed to shimmer before her eyes. Unreal. Impossible. But the murmurs around her were already turning skeptical. Protective in that way, villages become when outsiders threaten their established order. "Be careful, Adana," Chief Okafor warned. "These city people make promises they don't keep. They'll use you and discard you." Mama Ego added, "You think she can be a model? Look at her. She's too thin." Even Ifeoma, who had been fawning over Obina minutes before, laughed nervously. "He must be joking. Or maybe he's looking for someone to carry bags for the real models." The words cut, but for once, they didn't slice all the way through, because Obina was still looking at her with that same expression of professional interest, as if he saw something in her that everyone else had missed. "I'm serious," he said, addressing the crowd but keeping his eyes on Adana. "In Lagos, in Abuja, in cities around the world, the definition of beauty is expanding. What made someone ordinary here might make them extraordinary there. That's what we're looking for. Authenticity, uniqueness, people who challenge what we expect." He turned back to Adana. "You don't have to decide now. Think about it. But if you're interested, call me. We'll arrange transport, accommodation, everything. This could change your life." He pressed the card into her palm and returned to his car, leaving behind a village in chaos and a girl holding what might be her only chance to escape the narrow box Umwala had built around her. Was this the destiny Mama Chin had spoken of, or just another version of the same old lie, that she needed to change to be valuable? That night, the family debate raged like a storm. Ikenna was skeptical. These city people are tricksters. They make grand promises and deliver nothing. He probably wants to take you to Lagos and sell you into... He couldn't finish the sentence, but the fear in his eyes completed it for him. Nkechi was torn between hope and terror. But what if it's real? What if this is the opportunity we've been praying for? Chiamaka, surprisingly, was Adana's fiercest advocate. She should go. She should at least try. What does she have to lose by staying here? She's miserable. We all see it. The words stung because they were true, but also because they acknowledged what everyone had been pretending not to notice, that Adana's life in Umuala was a slow suffocation, a daily diminishment of spirit. Adana sat quietly through it all, turning Obina's card over and over in her hands, feeling the weight of the decision press against her chest like a stone. What if I go and fail? What if I go and succeed? Which would be worse? She went to Mama Chin the next morning before dawn, when the mist still hung low over the village and the roosters were just beginning their chorus. The old healer was already awake, grinding herbs with that steady rhythmic motion that Adana had come to associate with wisdom and peace. "You're going," Mama Chin said without looking up. It wasn't a question. "How did you know?" "Because you came here at dawn, which means you couldn't sleep, which means something in you has already decided. And now you need someone to tell you it's okay to choose yourself." Mama Chin set down her pestle and fixed Adana with those sharp, knowing eyes. "Listen to me carefully, child. Staying in Umwala because you're afraid to leave is not the same as staying because you want to. Fear makes a terrible foundation for any life. If you go and it doesn't work out, you can always come home. But if you don't go, you'll spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been, and that kind of wondering eats a person from the inside." Adana felt tears prick her eyes. What if they're right? What if I get to Lagos and realize I'm just as inadequate there as I am here? Mama Chin reached out and tilted Adana's chin up, forcing her to maintain eye contact. "Then you'll learn something valuable about yourself. But I don't think that's what will happen. I think you'll discover what I've always known, that you were planted in Umuala, but you were never meant to bloom here. Some seeds need different soil, different sunlight, different rain. That doesn't make the seed defective. It just makes it special." The words settled into Adana's heart like rain into parched earth, nourishing something that had been dying of thirst. She made her decision then, in Mama Chin's compound, with the smell of healing herbs in the air and the dawn light filtering through the rafters. She would go to Lagos. She would take the chance. She would finally choose herself. The next week was a whirlwind of preparation and goodbyes. Adana called Obina from the village phone booth, her hands shaking as she pressed the numbers. "I'll come," she said when he answered. "I want to try." His response was warm, professional, reassuring. "Excellent. I'll arrange everything. Pack light, just clothes for a few days. We'll provide what you need once you're here. Someone will come to collect you next Thursday." Thursday, 4 days away, 4 days to say goodbye to everything she'd ever known. Her mother wept openly, alternating between pride and terror. Her father grew silent and stern, but on the evening before she left, he pressed money into her hand, more than she'd ever seen him carry at once, and whispered, "If anyone mistreats you, you call me. I'll come and bring you home myself." Chimaka helped her pack, chattering excitedly about all the things Adana would see in Lagos, trying to mask her sadness with enthusiasm. The morning of her departure, half the village came to see her off. Some were genuinely supportive. Mama Chin stood front and center, her face proud and fierce. Others came out of curiosity or to witness what they assumed would be a spectacular failure. Chief Okafor gave her a long speech about representing Umuala well and not bringing shame to the village, as if she hadn't spent her entire life being shamed by this very village. When the car finally arrived, a different one this time, driven by a young man named Chukwudi, who worked for the agency, Adana's courage nearly failed. This was it, the moment of no return. She hugged her mother one last time, feeling Nkechi's body shake with sobs. She embraced her father, who held her so tightly she could barely breathe. She squeezed Chiamaka's hand and whispered, "Be yourself. Always." Then she climbed into the car, her small bag on her lap, and watched through the rear window as Umuala grew smaller and smaller, the red earth and palm trees and familiar faces receding like a dream upon waking. "I'm doing it," she thought with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. "I'm actually doing it. I'm leaving." The road stretched ahead of her, winding toward Lagos, toward uncertainty, toward possibility. But as the kilometers passed and Umuala disappeared completely from view, one question haunted her. Was she running toward something better, or simply running away from pain? Lagos hit Adana like a hurricane. The noise, the crowds, the endless traffic, the buildings that stretched toward the sky like metal and glass mountains, everything was overwhelming, intoxicating, terrifying. The modeling agency was nothing like she'd imagined. It was professional, yes, but also warm, full of people from every corner of Nigeria and beyond. There were girls as dark as midnight and others as light as dawn. There were girls with natural hair twisted into elaborate styles, and others with wigs dyed shocking colors. There were girls tall like Iroko trees and others petite like young palms. And there were girls like her, slim, angular, with the kind of unconventional beauty that traditional villages rejected, but modern cities celebrated. The training was rigorous, walking in heels, posing for cameras, understanding light and angles, managing social media. It was harder than any farm work she'd done in Umuala, but it was different because she was learning to see her body not as a problem to be fixed, but as an instrument to be mastered. Her first photo shoot was for a campaign promoting local fashion designers who wanted to showcase their clothes on real Nigerian women. Not just one body type, but many. When Adana saw herself in the photos, professionally styled and lit, she barely recognized the girl staring back. She looked confident, elegant, beautiful. Not in spite of her slimness, but because of it. The angles of her face caught the light in interesting ways. Her long neck displayed the jewelry perfectly. Her lean frame showed the flow and cut of the garments without overwhelming them. Within 6 months, Adana had become one of the agency's most requested models. She wasn't the highest paid or the most famous. Those honors went to girls with more traditional looks or those who'd been in the industry longer. But she had found her niche, her place, her audience. Fashion designers loved her versatility. Photographers appreciated how she took direction. Clients valued her professionalism. She sent money home regularly, more money than her father made tapping palm wine, more than her mother had ever dreamed of seeing. She called weekly, talking to her parents about her life in Lagos, about the jobs and the people and the city that never slept. Nkechi would cry happy tears, and Ikenna would grunt with pride he was too manly to express directly. But success, Adana discovered, wasn't the same as healing. Even in Lagos, surrounded by people who valued her, she still carried Umuala inside her, the voice that whispered she wasn't enough, the shame that had burrowed deep into her bones, the fear that one day everyone would realize she didn't deserve this. It was Mama Chin who helped her understand what was missing. On one of her rare visits home, triumphant returns where the village treated her like a celebrity, where even Chief Okafor praised her success, she sat with the old healer under that same Iroko tree where they'd had their crucial conversation. "You've found success," Mama Chin observed, "but have you found peace?" The question hit Adana like a stone to the chest, because the answer was no. She had escaped Umuala's narrow definition of beauty, but she hadn't escaped the damage it had done to her spirit. "What do I do?" Adana asked quietly. Mama Chin smiled. "You come home. Not to stay, your life is in Lagos now. But you come home and you help the next girl who's being called Ogwu, who's being told she's not enough, who's considering poison to make herself acceptable. You show them what you've learned, that there's a whole world beyond this village, and in that world, their difference is their power." The idea took root immediately, growing into a plan that felt right in a way nothing else had. Adana would return to Umuala not as a refugee fleeing judgment, but as someone with resources, knowledge, and most importantly, a story that could save others from the pain she'd endured. She would create a center, not a modeling school, but a place where young people could learn that their worth wasn't determined by their village's standards, where they could discover their own strengths, where they could be taught to dream beyond the red earth and palm trees. With her savings and some support from the modeling agency's community outreach program, Adana established Mama Chin's House of Wisdom, named after the woman who had saved her life twice, once from poison and once from despair. It wasn't large or fancy, just a 2-room building with books, computers donated by a Lagos tech company, and most importantly, a safe space for conversations about worth and beauty and possibility. She hired teachers from the city to come and teach workshops on everything from technology to art to business. But more than the skills, she taught perspective. She showed young people magazines from around the world. She brought in speakers who had succeeded in unconventional fields. She shared her own story, the painful parts and the triumphant parts, as proof that the box Umuala tried to put you in didn't have to be your final destination. The first time a thin girl named Azine walked into the center, tears streaming down her face because the other girls had called her Ogwu at school, Adana knew exactly why she'd come back. She knew what to say because she'd lived it. "There's nothing wrong with you. The problem is that this village has a limited imagination. But you get to be bigger than their imagination. You get to define yourself." And watching Azine's face transform from shame to tentative hope, Adana finally understood what Mama Chin had meant all those years ago. The gods hadn't made her different to punish her. They'd made her different so she could be a bridge between Umuala and the wider world, between traditional standards and expansive possibility, between girls who felt broken and the truth that they were actually whole. Now, as Adana splits her time between Lagos and Umuala, walking between two worlds with grace and purpose, she's learned something profound about beauty, about worth, about the journey from shame to self-acceptance. The scars from those years of rejection haven't disappeared. She still sometimes hears Ogwu in her head when she looks in the mirror, still fights the instinct to make herself smaller. But she's learned to thank those scars because they gave her something more valuable than easy acceptance. They gave her empathy, resilience, and a mission. Every girl who walks into Mama Chin's house of wisdom is a girl whose life might take a different path because someone who looked like her, who hurt like her, survived and thrived and came back to light the way. So here's the question for you. Wherever you are, whatever box your own village has tried to squeeze you into, what if the very thing that makes you different is exactly what the world needs? What if your struggle to fit in is actually a sign that you were meant to stand out? And most importantly, when will you stop asking permission to be yourself and simply claim the space you were always meant to occupy? Because somewhere, there's a girl who needs to see that it's possible to be different and not just survive, but flourish. Will you be the bridge for her? The way Mama Chin was for Adana. The way Adana became for Azine. The gods don't make mistakes. They make messengers. And sometimes the message is simply this: you are enough, exactly as you are. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end of this story. If it touched you or made you think about life in a different way, don't keep it just for yourself. Share it with someone who might need to hear this too. And if you truly want to support this channel, please subscribe, turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. I love reading what you have to say. And finally, if you really enjoyed it and want to help keep these stories alive, consider buying me a simple coffee on Ko-fi. Even the smallest gesture makes a big difference and helps us bring more stories like this to you. Thank you, and see you in the next one.